All right, everyone. So I want to talk to you guys about how Jesus Christ destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. When we talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, what we almost never talk about is how this story proves that God is more than one person. The Jews deny that God is more than one person. The Muslims deny that God is more than one person. But yet, when we read about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in the book of Genesis, in chapter 19 of the book of Genesis, it says, when describing the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, that the Lord brought down fire from the Lord. It doesn't say, and God rained down fire upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. It says, and the Lord rained down fire from the Lord. God rained down fire from God. So God is more than one person. So right there in the Old Testament, we see the Trinity. We see God as more than one person. It's right there in the Old Testament. And I was reading about this today in the dialogue between Justine Martyr and Trypho. I was reading this today. It has been a very enriching and fascinating read. It is the earliest recorded dialogue, or really I should say debate, between a Jew and a Christian. Now, St. Paul debated with the Jews, but really this is the earliest thorough debate to be recorded between a Christian and a Jew. And in this case, it's Justine Martyr, one of the earliest apologists for Christianity, and Trypho, who was a Jewish scholar. And in this debate, multiple times, Trypho asks Justine Martyr, can you prove to us that God can be more than one person? Or can you prove to us that this man, Jesus Christ, can be God at the same time? Or that this other person can be God at the same time? And so Justine Martyr points to them to this verse, shows them this verse from Genesis chapter 19. And the Lord rained down fire from the Lord. And right after Justine Martyr quotes this verse, one of the companions of Trypho interjects into the conversation and says, well, we must conclude that when it says the Lord rained down fire from the Lord, that this Lord who rains down fire from the Lord was not the Lord, but an angel. We have to conclude this. We must conclude this. Well, why? You see, this is the problem with getting into these sorts of debates. People can't really just look at the text for what it is. They have to look into the text. They have to really coerce the text to comply with their narrative. They have to force the text to be made in their image. They try to recreate the text into their image, whatever image it is that they want. So they are radical Unitarians. They can't believe that God can be more than one person. So when they see this text that says, and God rained down fire from God, the Lord rained down fire from the Lord, they can't just say, oh, look, God is more than one person. You can see it clearly in this text. They can't say that. They can't just agree to that. They can't agree with that. No, no, no. They have to force the text to acquiesce and to comply to their narrative. They have to confine the entire Bible to their narrative. And the entire Bible is held hostage by their narrative. And so one of the friends of Trypho says, well, we have to conclude that this Lord who rains down fire from the Lord is merely an angel. But when you actually look at the Hebrew, what does it say? It says, and Jehovah rained down fire from Jehovah. It doesn't say, oh, and an angel, or Michael the archangel, or Gabriel rained down fire from the Lord. No, it says, and Jehovah rained down fire from Jehovah. So right there in the book of Genesis, you see God being more than one person. And it's very, very fascinating. So I want to read to you guys some excerpts from the dialogue. Well, I want to read to you guys more so, really, I want to read to you guys the verses that Trypho references, because they really do speak for themselves as to the fact that God is more than one person, and how you can from that conclusion how Christianity makes sense, how the Trinity makes sense, and how it's found in the Old Testament. So in Genesis chapter 19, it says, "The sun was risen upon the earth, and Lot entered into Segor, and the Lord rained upon Sodom brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven." Go to the chapter before that, chapter 18. What happens in chapter 18? 3 men visit Abraham. 3 men visit Abraham, and Abraham bows down. Well, in Judaism, you don't bow down to angels. You only bow down to God. So Abraham sees 3 men, and he bows down. And so they make dinner for the 3 men. 3 men eat. They then tell Abraham, "We're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah." And Abraham begins to talk to God, and God is one of these 3 persons. And God begins to talk to Abraham. So God comes in the form of a man to Abraham. And Abraham says, "Well, if there are 10 innocent men in Sodom and Gomorrah, will you spare the cities?" And God tells Abraham, if there are 3 or if there are 10 innocent men, 10 innocent people in Sodom and Gomorrah, I will spare the cities. I'll spare the cities. And it says in the beginning of chapter 19, and two of the 3 men went to Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, why didn't all 3 of them go to Sodom and Gomorrah? Why did only 2 of the 3 men go to Sodom and Gomorrah? Because one of them was still speaking with Abraham. Well, who was that one? It was God. Because in the book of Genesis, it clearly states that Abraham was speaking to God. So 3 men visited Abraham, and Abraham only bowed down to one because that was God. And God, in the form of the man who visited Abraham, meets with the 2 angels in Sodom and Gomorrah, and they destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And it says, "And the Lord," meaning the man who visited Abraham, one of the 3 men who visited Abraham, "rained down fire and brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord." He rained down fire and brimstone from the Lord. So God, in the form of a man, rains down fire from God. So here you have God in the form of a man and God in heaven. And it says, "And the Lord rained upon Sodom brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven." So there's the Lord in heaven, and there's the Lord in the world, on the earth, in the form of a man. This is God the Son and God the Father working together to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. So when people say things like, "Oh, well, Jesus Christ would accept the LGBT or whatever, and Jesus never mentioned Skittles / homosexuality," you go right to Genesis. Well, you believe in the Trinity, right? And then they'll most likely say, "Yeah, I believe in the Trinity." Well, it says right here in the Old Testament that the Lord rained down fire from the Lord. So you see the Trinity in the Old Testament, and one of the verses that evinces, that demonstrates the Trinity in the Old Testament is telling us that one of the persons of the Godhead is working with another person of the Godhead to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. It's right there. But what do the Jews who are arguing with Justine Martyr say? How do they reply? Well, one of the friends of Trypho says, well, we have to conclude that this is an angel. But that's not what the text says. That is not what the Torah says. And these Orthodox Jews are very, very reverential towards the Torah, right? They're always using the word Torah, 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 Torah. They say the word Torah so much that it becomes redundant and the word becomes ominous because you start thinking about these people who are always trying to twist the scriptures. Torah, 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 Torah. But that's not what the Torah says. The Torah says Jehovah rained down fire from Jehovah. 2 persons, same God. It's right there. It's right there. Going back to the part of the story when the 3 men visited Abraham, it says here, "And God appeared to him," Abraham. God appeared to him under the oak in Mamre, as he was sitting at the floor of his tent in the very heat of the day. And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw and beheld 3 men standing near him. And as soon as he saw them, he ran to meet them from the door of his tent, and he bowed himself toward the ground. He bowed down before the 3 men. Why? Because one of the 3 men was God. God in the form of a man. And when God in the form of a man destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, it says he rained down fire and brimstone from the Lord. That's God the Father. So God the Son is raining down fire from God the Father. God is more than one person. And it says it clearly right here that God is more than one person. So you have these Muslims and you have these Jews who will say, well, God can never come in the form of a man. God doesn't come in the form of a man. Well, if that way of thinking is so ingrained in your religion, then why is Abraham bowing down to a man? Why? Why is that? It's quite obvious that God can come as a man. God can come to earth as humanity, and we can worship him. Because people will say, well, you guys worship Jesus, and we can never bow down to a man, but Abraham is bowing down to a man. And the Bible says that that man was God. And it says that when that man destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, he rained down fire from the Lord. He, as the Lord, rained down fire from the Lord. It is so, so profound. It's so profound. And I love this part of the verse. This is Genesis 19, I want to say verse 28. It says, and Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. So he got up early in the morning, right? So he had this dinner with the 3 men, one of whom was God. And then they said, we're going to go out and destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. He wakes up in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked towards Sodom and Gomorrah and the whole land of that country. And behold, he saw a flame go up from the earth as the smoke of a furnace. So basically, he saw a nuclear bomb. God nuked Sodom and Gomorrah. The 2 persons of the Godhead were destroying Sodom and Gomorrah by raining down fire and brimstone upon these evil cities. And Abraham wakes up and he sees a giant mushroom cloud up in the air. He saw a nuclear explosion. So God nukes Sodom and Gomorrah. And really, it's quite clear Jesus Christ nuked Sodom and Gomorrah. You have these Jewish people who come around and they love to make these arguments such as, how come you're not doing circumcision? How come you're not following circumcision? And in the debate between Trypho and Justine Martyr, Trypho is also using this very argumentation. He's always, not always, but many times in the debate, he keeps arguing with Justine Martyr that Christians don't do physical circumcision. Therefore, they are not of God. Christianity is a false religion. And he's constantly asking, rhetorically, asking Justine Martyr, why don't you guys believe in mandatory circumcision? Why don't you guys believe in mandatory circumcision? And Jews today argue the exact same way. They always bring up circumcision. That's their fixation. Circumcision, circumcision. Well, was Melchizedek circumcised? And this is one of the arguments that Justine Martyr uses in his debate with Trypho. He asks Trypho, was Melchizedek circumcised? Now, Trypho doesn't really answer this question, but of course, Melchizedek was not circumcised. The ritual of circumcision, the rite of circumcision, was established with Abraham. That's when circumcision was established in the Jewish religion, with Abraham. Abraham was circumcised. And so in the debate, Justine Martyr brings up Melchizedek. And he tells Trypho Melchizedek was not circumcised. But yet, Abraham accepted the offering of Melchizedek. The circumcised accepted the offering of the uncircumcised. And Melchizedek was a priest, a high priest of God. He was the king of Jerusalem at the time of Abraham, but he was also a priest. So he was a priest king. And this was very common in far antiquity, to have priest kings. And Melchizedek gives an offering to God. It is not an animal sacrifice. Rather, it is a sacrifice of bread and wine, the very things that Christ offered in the Last Supper. The sacrifice in Christianity, the ritual sacrifice in Christianity, is not animal sacrifice. It is the sacrifice of bread and wine. It is the sacrifice of the Eucharist and the chalice, which both represent Jesus Christ. The Eucharist representing the flesh of Christ, the wine representing the blood of Christ. And Melchizedek gives this offering of bread and wine, presaging and foreshadowing the offerings of the Eucharist and the chalice in Christianity. And what does it say? Sit thou at my right hand until I make thy enemies thy footstool. The Lord will send forth the scepter of thy power out of Zion, and rule thou in the midst of thy enemies. With thee is the principality in the day of thy strength. In the brightness of thy saints, from the womb before the day star I begot thee. So God is telling God, from the womb I begot you. This is talking about the birth of Christ. It's foreshadowing the Virgin Mary being pregnant with Jesus Christ. And it says, thou art a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So the Lord is saying to the Lord, you are of the priesthood, not of Aaron. You are not of the Levitical priesthood. You are of the priesthood of Melchizedek. You are of the priesthood of an uncircumcised Gentile, because Melchizedek was not a Hebrew. He was not a Jew. He was not a Levite. He was a Gentile priest, and he was not circumcised. And in the story in the book of Genesis, what does it describe? It describes Abraham, the circumcised man, accepting the offering of an uncircumcised priest. And the Lord is telling the Lord, you are of the priesthood not of Moses, but of a Gentile who was not circumcised. You are of the priesthood of Melchizedek. And what does St. Paul say in the New Testament? Writing about Jesus Christ, he quotes this verse from Psalms, and he says that Jesus Christ was of the priesthood of Melchizedek. The priesthood of Melchizedek, an uncircumcised priesthood, a priesthood that does not mandate physical circumcision, but spiritual circumcision. And what does it say in Jeremiah chapter 9? For behold, the days come, saith the Lord, and I will visit upon everyone that hath the foreskin circumcised. So here it's talking about physical circumcision. Upon Egypt and Judah and Edom, and upon the children of Moab, for all the Gentiles are uncircumcised in the flesh, but all the house of Israel are uncircumcised in the heart. And it speaks of the Jews being uncircumcised in the heart. And what does God prefer? What does God actually want? He wants the circumcision of the heart. In fact, Moses says this. In the Torah, Moses says, circumcise your hearts. Jeremiah says this in chapter 4, verse 4. It speaks of the Jews needing to be circumcised in the heart. And it says, be circumcised to the Lord and take away the foreskins of your hearts. And the Jews will always argue and say, well, circumcision is an eternal law. The law of circumcision is eternal. It can never be abrogated, and that's that. And so you Christians not believing in mandatory circumcision makes you really not of God. It makes you really someone who is against God. But amazingly, because they said that's it, it's final, right? It's final, that's it. Circumcision is final, it's law, it can't be abrogated, and then they accuse Christians of abrogating the law. But look what it says here in Jeremiah. It says, behold, the days shall come, saith the Lord, and I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. They'll sit there and say, all these laws that were taught to the children of Israel are eternal. You cannot stop doing them. That's it. They're final. But what they fail to realize and what they refuse to realize is that things like circumcision were there as a sign. Circumcision was instituted as a sign of what? A sign of the circumcision of the heart, which is what God cares about most. They take the sign that represents what is greater than the sign, and they make that sign the final law. They make that sign greater than that which it represents. Greater than that which it represents. So, well, circumcision is there as a sign of what? The circumcision of the heart. But God cares more about the circumcision of the heart. If you do physical circumcision, but you don't care about the circumcision of the heart, well, then it's all just a show, and you're really just trying to trick God. Well, I'm circumcised, God, but you don't really care about his teachings. You don't really care about the intricacies of God's teachings. To you, you're saved because you're circumcised, or you're saved because you're a child of Abraham. And this is what John the Baptist was dealing with when he said, do not say to yourselves that I am saved because we have Abraham as our father, for I tell you now that God can make these very stones into sons of Abraham. And it's amazing that God says right there in Jeremiah that I'm going to give you guys a new covenant. So if everything is just set in stone and circumcision is set in stone, then why does God say I'm going to give you a new covenant? Not the covenant that I gave to your fathers. No, a new covenant. A new covenant. And in Christianity, we have what? We have the concept or the phenomena of the new covenant. And Jews will say that we're abrogating the law. No, we are not. We are simply abiding by the seasons of God. There's this argument that St. Augustine uses. He says, well, we have the changing of the seasons in nature. You know, we go from spring to summer, from summer to fall, from fall to winter. Is God abrogating nature? No, there is a system in which nature is flowing, in which nature is transitioning into different stages. Same thing with God's plan for humanity. There are different stages. There's one stage in which there is a covenant given to Israel, but then we have a new covenant. And the Jews will hear this and say that we're abrogating the old covenant. No, we're not. We're simply abiding by the flow of the seasons because God says in Jeremiah, I'm going to give you guys a new covenant. So it's not abrogation. We're not going against God. We're simply going with the flow. I have no pleasure in you. So God is telling Israel, I have no pleasure in you, saith the Lord, and I will not receive your sacrifices from your hands. For from the rising of the sun even to the going down, my name has been glorified among the Gentiles. My name has been glorified among the Gentiles. Well, today the Jews aren't proselytizing. What do you have in Judaism today? You have a bunch of black hat fanatics who don't even believe in proselytizing to non-Jews. They want everything to be closed in. They're like the Amish. They want everything to be closed in. They're all in their little communities. They don't preach to anyone. They don't care about preaching to anyone. They don't want to bring the Gentiles in. And they're supposed to be a light to the Gentiles. The Old Testament talks about being a light to the Gentiles, how Israel was supposed to be a light to the Gentiles. And yet you have these people who call themselves Jews, and they are what? They're closed in. They got these little tight, cliquish communities. They don't want to talk to outsiders. No outsiders. That's not Judaism. That's not Judaism. And in one of my last live streams, someone said something like, well, the Orthodox Jews, they're like the Catholics of Judaism. No, they're not. Because what does the word Catholic mean? The word Catholic means universal. Universal. Why is it universal? Because you're supposed to bring all men into the church, all humans into the church. And what does Jesus tell the Jews after he whips the sellers of merchandise from his temple? After he whips out these people who were prostituting his father's house, he said that my father's house was built to be a house of prayer for all nations, and you have made it into a den of thieves. It didn't care about the Gentiles, didn't want to bring in the Gentiles. In fact, Jesus said to the Jews, he said, you do not allow anyone to enter. You do not allow anyone to enter. Why was this? Well, because at that time, the Jews were very much so subscribing to the school of Shammai. You had the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai, and Hillel wanted the religion, he wanted the true religion of Israel to be open to all humanity. He wanted to make it easy for Gentiles to come into the fold of God. And Shammai wanted to make it nearly impossible, or really just plainly impossible, for Gentiles to come into the sheepfold of God. So that way of thinking, the way of thinking of Shammai, was the way of thinking that really was dominating the Jewish world at the time of Christ. Whereas Christ, he was teaching what Hillel was teaching. Not entirely, but to a great extent. He was teaching what Hillel was teaching. And see, Hillel, he was alive before Christ was born, which means that the religion of Hillel was the true religion. Because the Temple Institute, before Jesus Christ, the Temple Institute, before the advent of Christianity, before the advent of Christ, the Temple Institute was the institution of the true religion. Jesus Christ was born, he began his ministry, and he preached that he was the temple. He said, tear down this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. He was teaching, I am the temple, I am the Messiah. After they killed Christ, really, the temple was rendered useless. There was no point in the temple anymore because Jesus Christ is the temple. But before the advent of Christianity, the institution of the temple was a part of the true religion of God. So when we look at Hillel, we're not talking about just some rabbi. We're talking about a preacher of the true religion of God, of Yahweh. And so Hillel had a problem with how tribalistic the Jews were becoming. So he had an enemy. His enemy was Shammai and all of his followers. The problem was that the thinking of Shammai, the paradigm, the worldview of Shammai, began to really dominate Judea. And so when Christ was preaching, he was preaching against the ideology of Shammai. And when he was preaching how the Jews were making it difficult for people to enter, he was really, really preaching against the ideology of Shammai. And Christ was more so preaching the school of thought of Hillel. And it's not a coincidence that St. Paul came from the school of thought of Hillel. He came from the school of Hillel. And so you look at Judaism today, and what is it? You have these fanatic black hats who make it nearly impossible for people to convert to their religion. They want everything to be enclosed. And really, who the hell wants to join their religion anyway? It looks dirty and smelly. And then you have the Reformed Jews, the likes of which you see. Who do you see in the ranks of the Reformed Jews? You see Dennis Prager, who says that that the Bible said that, man, you can be just as happy with little girls as you will be with little boys. I mean, it's very, very sickening.
The Bible said, men, you are as happy with boys. I don't mean 8-year-olds, 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
Just as a grown man is happy with a 15-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. But in that sense, homosexuals and heterosexuals are identical.
So that's the Reformed Jews. They're weird. They're just a bunch of weirdos. So really, where is Judaism? Where is it? It's not this universal religion. It's this very enclosed tribalistic cult. And then you have a bunch of Sam Harrises walking around saying that they're Jews, and they don't even believe that the God of Israel, the God of Judaism, exists. Because, and here's the thing, when Jews are talking to Christians, all of a sudden they're religious, right? They're arguing religion. They're arguing that Jesus Christ was not the Mashiach, was not the Messiah. When they're talking about how they changed the world and how Jews are the greatest people in the world, all of a sudden they're an ethnic group. So they're an ethnic group when it's to their advantage. They are a religion when that's to their advantage, when they're arguing with Christians. But really, what is Judaism, right? What is the standard of Judaism? You have a bunch of atheist Jews. You have Jews who are Buddhist, Jews who are Hindu, Jews who are Reformed. You have Jews who are fanatics, who dress up with black hats, and they look like crows. They look like flocks of crows. So really, what is the standard for Judaism? And what I see is that really one of the things that greatly unites all of them is an animosity towards Christ. Because you talk to an atheist Jew, an Orthodox Jew, Reformed Jew, well, when they're not fighting the Arabs, they're fighting each other. But a Christian walks in, and they will unite to go against that Christian. So what is the standard of Judaism? It's not universal. It's very tribalistic. And you see right here in the book of Malachi, God is telling Israel, I have no pleasure in you, saith the Lord, and I will not receive your sacrifices from your hands. For from the rising of the sun even to the going down, my name has been glorified among the Gentiles. Well, when has that ever happened? My name has been glorified amongst the Gentiles. When has that happened? It has only happened within the advent of Christianity and really within Christendom and within the Christian world. That's when you see this. Because what do you have? What's in Christianity? You have the belief in a Jewish rabbi named Jesus Christ. You have a belief in Mashiach, Jesus Christ. In fact, in the Old Testament, it says that the Messiah will come and then the temple will be destroyed. That's what it says in the Old Testament. Well, the temple was destroyed. So you guys missed him. You didn't miss him. You reject him. You reject the Mashiach. And the Christians are coming home. The Gentiles are coming over and they're telling the Jews, listen, you guys missed the bus. You missed your Mashiach. You rejected your Mashiach. Not only that, but you supported killing your Mashiach. And here are the Gentiles revering and worshiping the Mashiach. It's not Israel. It's the Gentiles. And it reminds me of that verse in the book of Acts where Paul does his last final attempt to preach to the Israelites, right? He tries his last and final attempt to preach to the Jews. It's right there in the end of the book of Acts, right there in the end of the book of Acts. And it says that a great tumult was in the land, and all the Jews were arguing, and they were enraged at Paul. And what does Paul say to the mob? He says, I will preach to the Gentiles, and they will listen to me. And he leaves, and the book of Acts pretty much ends right there. I will go to the Gentiles, and they will listen. He doesn't say, well, I'm going to continue to preach to the Jews. I really got to preach to the Jews, even though they're hard-headed. No. I will preach to the Gentiles, and they will listen. I have no pleasure in you, Israel. For from the rising of the sun even to the going down, my name has been glorified among the Gentiles, and in every place there is sacrifice, and there is offered to my name a clean oblation. For my name is honored among the Gentiles, saith the Lord, but you profane it. You, Israel, profane the name of God. My name is honored among the Gentiles. Well, are we talking about the ancient world? Is God talking about the ancient world? Well, in the ancient world, the people around Israel were worshiping Mother Earth. They were worshiping Father Sky. They were worshiping Pazuzu, who was a demon. They were worshiping Enlil. They were worshiping Marduk, Jupiter, the planets. And then if you left the Middle East, you would have gone to the Hellenic world. You would have seen the same type of thing, worshiping the stars, the planets, the constellations, astronomy, or astrology, I should say. You would have seen people worshiping Jupiter and Saturn and Mars. And then if you would have gone all the way up to Northern Europe, you would have seen the Celts. They were worshiping the mother goddess. Then if you were to go to the ancient Germanians, you would have seen people worshiping Wotan, Odin, Freya, Loki, elves. And then if you were to go all the way down to Africa, you would have seen people worshiping some earth goddess, and they were doing all sorts of abominable rituals. If you were to cross the Atlantic and go to North America, you would have seen the indigenous tribes, and they were worshiping also the planets and Mother Earth and the Father Sky and the Sun God and all this stuff. It was a pagan world. So what does God mean when he says, and the Gentiles are glorifying my name, but you guys aren't? Well, the Gentiles were heathens. So what is God talking about here? When did this happen? When was this fulfilled? But then we look around in our world today, and what do we see? We see people in China, Africa, the Middle East, Europe, worshiping the God of Israel, worshiping Yahweh, reading the Torah, reading the Old Testament. And who was the one that got more Gentiles to read the Torah than anyone in human history? It was Jesus Christ. And isn't it amazing that there is this book that you can find? It's the title of which is something to the likes of How Jews Changed the World. Oh my God, I couldn't believe it. I bought a copy of this book, it was like a year or two ago, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing in this book. Well, I actually can believe it because it is what it is, right? Jesus is mentioned. The book is about how Jews changed the world, right? How the Jews changed the world. Okay, that's a fascinating topic. The book better mention Jesus Christ. And it better be mentioning Jesus Christ a lot. Because who is the most influential Jew in history? It's not Freud. It's not Marx. It's not Einstein. It's Jesus. Bottom line, it's Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is mentioned 6 times in this book. 6 times. And then Einstein, I believe, is mentioned 66 times. So 11 times more than Jesus. And then Karl Marx is mentioned 30 plus times. So apparently, according to this book, Karl Marx and Einstein were making more of a difference as Jews than Jesus Christ. Even though Karl Marx was a militant, vicious atheist, Einstein, I think, was some kind of a deist or some kind of an agnostic. He surely was not a religious Jew. So they both denied the God of Israel. And Jesus Christ, who was a rabbi, who taught the teachings of Judaism, who honored and abided by the teachings of Judaism, who went to the synagogue, who went to the temple, Jesus Christ did not make as much of a difference as a Jew, because the book is about how Jews shaped the world, than Karl Marx and Albert Einstein. This is the world we live in, because they don't want to associate Christianity with Judaism. And this is the problem. They don't want to associate Christianity with Judaism. They don't want to associate Jesus with the Jewish world, even though Jesus was born in the Jewish world, was Jewish, was a rabbi, preached in synagogues, went to the temple. And what did he do? Jesus got the Gentiles to glorify the God of Israel. My name is honored among the Gentiles, but you profane it. Psalm chapter 18, what does it say? A people which I knew not hath served me. At the hearing of the ear they have obeyed me. A people which I knew not. Well, God knew the Jews. God knew the tribe of Judah. He knew Israel. But it says here, a people which I knew not hath served me. Which people was this? Which people who God did not know served God? It's obviously talking about the Gentiles. And then there is this other verse. This is from Isaiah chapter 66. It says, what is this house you built for me? So God is telling Israel about the temple that they built for him, for God. What is this house you built for me, saith the Lord? Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. So even God is telling the Israelites, what is this temple? You know, the Jews were revering their temple. Practically, in a way, they were worshiping their temple, to the point that Josephus tells us that when the Romans were at war with them and the temple got caught on fire, that there were Jews who were throwing themselves into the fire. They would rather kill themselves than watch the temple be destroyed. And yet God is telling the Israelites in Isaiah, what is this house you built for me? Heaven is my throne. You guys are so fixated on this temple, but I'm everywhere. I'm omnipresent. And what does Jesus say? Because remember what it says in the gospel. It says that the disciples went to Jesus and they said, Jesus, look at this amazing architecture. And they were pointing to the temple. Look at this wonderful, beautiful architecture. And Jesus says, yeah, all this architecture that you guys are marveling at so much, it's all going down. It's all going down. It's all going to come crashing down. Not one stone will stand. It's all going to come crashing down. And the Jews heard this, and they said, this man wants to destroy our temple. Let's kill him. Let's kill this man. Even though he was blameless, even though he was sinless, he broke no law. He made a prophecy. And they didn't realize that they were looking at the temple. They were looking at the Mashiach. They refused to see this. Most of them did. There were some that did see that he was Mashiach, that he was the Messiah. And speaking of prophets, here is another argument that Justine Martyr uses against Trypho. He tells Trypho, where are your prophets today? Do you guys have any prophets today? Where are the current day prophets for the Jews? You read about ancient Israel. You read about Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Malachi, Zechariah. Where are the prophets? Why don't you guys have any more prophets? What happened? Where are they? Who are they? Ben Shapiro? Who's the prophet of the Jews right now? Do you guys have any prophets right now? Sam Harris, where's your prophet? There are no prophets. Why not? Because God shut the door. He closed the door on the era of prophets. And Jesus himself said this. He said, after John the Baptist, there will be no prophets. God closed the door on prophets. That's it. he closed the door on there being any more prophets. And isn't it interesting that the prophets, that the phenomena of Israel having prophets ended in the advent of Christ? Where are the prophets of Israel? All I see is a bunch of people who look like a flock of crows. Where are the prophets? Where are they? Where are the prophets of Israel? You don't see them because there aren't any right now. Because that door was closed. Because the Messiah has come. And what does it say? Because it speaks of the Gentiles giving a clean offering to the Lord. And what does it say? What does God say? I will not take calves out of thy house, nor the goats out of thy flocks, for all the beasts of the fields are mine, the cattle on the hills and oxen. I know all the fowls of the air, and with me is the beauty of the field. If I should be hungry, I would not tell thee, for the world is mine and the fullness thereof. Shall I eat the flesh of bullocks or drink the blood of goats? Offer to God the sacrifice of praise and pay thy vows to the Most High. So this is a prophecy. It's saying, God is saying, I'm not going to accept animal sacrifice anymore. I'm only going to accept what? The sacrifice of praise. I'm going to accept the sacrifice of praise. And the Messiah is of which priesthood? The priesthood of Melchizedek. What does God say in the Psalms? It says, and the Lord said to my Lord, you are of the priesthood of Melchizedek. God is telling God, you are of the priesthood of Melchizedek. And what offering, what sacrifice did Melchizedek give? It was the sacrifice of bread and wine, not the sacrifice of animals, but the sacrifice of bread and wine. And what does St. Paul say of Christ? That Christ is of the order of Melchizedek, meaning that the priesthood of Christianity is the priesthood of Melchizedek, the priesthood of an uncircumcised Gentile. And what does God say in Malachi? That my name is glorified amongst the Gentiles, but my name is profaned by you. And today we see the Gentiles praising God, not giving animal sacrifices. Now, how come the Jews are not giving animal sacrifices anymore? How come the Jews are not doing animal sacrifices? Well, because the temple was destroyed. Well, what does it say in the Old Testament? It says that the Messiah will come and then the temple shall be destroyed, which means that the Messiah already came. The temple was destroyed. Well, why aren't you guys doing animal sacrifice? Because the temple was destroyed, which means that the Messiah already came. So who was the Messiah? The Messiah was not some rabbi from the Chabad. Because why aren't you guys giving animal sacrifices? Because the temple was destroyed. The Bible says that the Messiah will come before the destruction of the temple, which means the Messiah already came. And you guys missed the boat. Or you guys rejected the boat, I should say. And so we're not living in the era of animal sacrifices, which means we're living in the era post-Messiah. We're living in the era after the Messiah came. So there you have it. And I'm going to be talking more about this subject as I read more of this book. It's very fascinating. You look at the Old Testament and you see God as more than one person. You see the Lord raining down fire from the Lord, destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. Right there, the Trinity, the multi-personhood of God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And then you see in the book of Psalms, the Lord telling the Lord that you are of the priesthood of Melchizedek. And then the Jews will say that we have to be circumcised. But then in the book of Psalms, it says you are of the priesthood of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was not circumcised. Melchizedek gave an offering of bread and wine. Abraham, who was circumcised, receives the offering of the one who was not circumcised. Why? Because the circumcision of the heart is greater than physical circumcision, because physical circumcision is only there to be representative of something greater than the representation. Anyway, I've talked long enough. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.